I am Marlo Grafton, and I never thought a textless photo would be the thing to unravel me. It came on a Monday, Monaco time, 9:13 a.m. The image: Maura, my sister-in-law, standing mid-deck in a crisp white romper, one hand on her oversized sunglasses, the other cradling a champagne flute. Behind her, blurred just enough to feel strategic, were my husband's parents, two of our nephews, and a handful of the usual designer friends who orbit the Grafton family yacht like well-accessorized satellites. Everyone was there, everyone but me. No caption, no tags. Just Maura's favorite kind of message: silence that cuts deeper than any word could. That trip was an annual thing, a generational tradition the Graftons clung to like legacy. Family only, they always said, though family in their case was less about blood and more about hierarchy. Maura had once joked at brunch that I was our resident working-class ornament, which she insisted was playful. I'd laughed because I was tired, not because it was funny, but this time was different. This time, no invite ever came. No gentle, maybe next year, no excuse about capacity or crew limits. Just nothing. I didn't even know the trip was happening until Maura posted that photo. The Grafton family yacht, the Odyssey 2, gliding through the Riviera without me on it. The only problem? I had paid for the damn thing. Not literally, of course, not yet. But I'd soon learn that fate has an impeccable sense of irony. Before I tell you how I ended up owning the very yacht they tried to erase me from, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. My husband, Clay, didn't say much when I showed him the photo. He mumbled something about not wanting to get in the middle of Maura's thing, and then scrolled back to his Slack messages. I remember looking at his profile from across the kitchen island, clean-shaven, cardigan folded over his chair like always, and wondering how long I'd been with a man who confused silence with neutrality. I poured my coffee and didn't bother adding milk. My stomach wasn't going to let me finish it anyway. It wasn't the first time I'd been left out, just the most expensive one. Let me rewind a little. I wasn't born a Grafton. I married into it after years of clawing my way through freelance contracts and underpaid UI/UX gigs to build my own boutique design studio. I met Clay at a startup launch party. He was tall, charming, mildly aloof in that way only people born into comfort can be. He said he liked that I didn't fawn over his last name. I said I liked that he knew how to pick good wine. We married after 3 years. I wore a thrifted vintage dress and designed my own wedding invites on printer paper because Maura said formal embossing would clash with the venue vibe. After the wedding, Maura made a point to say, "It's cute how resourceful you are. So, Brooklyn." That was the first time I realized she wasn't trying to compliment me. She was filing me into a box. It didn't take long to see how tight that box really was. Dinners with the family were always performances. Maura ran the social script like a Broadway stage manager, cueing applause for her kids' violin recitals and Jordan's latest real estate flip. My contributions? A soft nod at best. No matter how many Fortune 100 clients I quietly stacked, how many campaigns I spearheaded that boosted their ROI by double digits, it was always Marlo's little web thing or your artsy app. At first I thought it was generational. Then I realized it was intentional. I was the outsider they never expected to stick around, the one who married up. And so I played the role, smiled, nodded, helped take photos. Maura even asked me once to lightly retouch her bikini pics before she posted them from last year's yacht trip. I should have said no. I should have sent her back the untouched version and logged off. But I didn't, because part of me still wanted in. That photo, though, that photo broke something open. It wasn't just that I wasn't invited. It was that no one thought I would notice, that I'd be too busy with my little studio or my Brooklyn friends, that I'd quietly stay behind, sip oat milk lattes, and smile when they came back bronzed and bloated from champagne. But here's the thing, no one in that photo knew. I'd been quietly working on a project, something bigger than anything I'd done before, something that, if it went through, would not only shift my business, it would shift everything. And they'd just poked the wrong bear. The first time I realized I was invisible to the Graftons was during Jordan's engagement party. Jordan is Clay's younger brother, the golden retriever of the family. All blinding smiles and boat shoes, and a trust fund large enough to casually fund his property development hobby. His fiancée, Cambria, was from a family that had been on the cover of Town & Country, which, to the Graftons, made her the human equivalent of royal seal approval. They held the party at the Grafton estate in Cape May. The whole place smelled like roses and ocean salt and generational wealth. Clay and I had flown in from New York the night before, and I remember spending 2 hours helping the housekeeper rearrange the floral arches after Maura decided she preferred a fuller hydrangea presence. I did it without complaint. I even skipped lunch to make sure the centerpieces aligned with the monogrammed napkins. And still, when Maura raised her glass for the toast, she thanked the florist, the private chef, and even the valet coordinator, but not me. I stood there, glass in hand, wearing a dress I had stitched a week before, because I couldn't find anything elegant enough in stores that didn't make me feel like I was pretending to belong. Clay didn't notice. He was too busy laughing at a joke Jordan made about how tech people will eventually automate wedding planning. Can you imagine? No need for a real coordinator, just an app called Wed Me Maybe. I laughed too. But I wasn't laughing inside. It was always like that. My accomplishments, quiet, strategic, digital, were never loud enough for them to hear. When I landed a partnership with a global cosmetics brand, Maura's response was, "Oh, I thought Fenty already had an app?" When my studio helped a disability rights org rebrand their entire platform, Clay's dad Gordon said, "Good for you, dear. Always good to give back when you can't scale." They didn't even try to understand what I did. Or maybe they didn't care to. The only person who seemed remotely curious was Nana Ruth, the family's 89-year-old matriarch who wore Chanel pantsuits and once told me she liked my weird mind. But after she passed 2 summers ago, there was no buffer left, no ally. Just me and the silent message, "You're welcome to orbit, but don't dare shine." I remember one 4th of July, Maura organized a beach picnic. She handed out roles like she was casting a play. Jordan was in charge of drinks, Cambria would curate the playlist, Clay would handle fireworks. I asked where I could help. Maura blinked at me and said, "You can design the napkin folds. You're artsy, right?" Napkin folds. I nodded, smiled, went home and cried while folding 56 damask squares into origami peacocks. The sad thing is, I thought if I worked hard enough, I'd earn my way in. That's how I was raised, small-town Ohio, 2 public school teachers for parents, a rented duplex, and the deeply American belief that effort would buy you belonging. But the Graftons didn't operate on merit. They operated on presentation, on lineage, on appearances that didn't make them think too much. My success didn't make sense to them. It didn't come with billboards or magazine spreads. It came with code, team collaboration, and sleepless nights. It came from me, and that was the problem. Maura once introduced me at a charity event as Clay's wife. She does computers or graphics or something. She's very clever. I don't think I even blinked. I was too busy calculating the ROI on pretending not to care. But you learn over time. The more you're erased, the more you shrink to fit. Until one day you don't recognize the version of yourself they let stay. So I stopped trying. I stopped dressing to their standard. I stopped laughing at jokes that weren't funny. I stopped asking Maura if she needed help setting up centerpieces. And in that vacuum, I began to build something of my own. Something no one in that family could define or dismiss. But before I tell you how that thing came to life, how I stitched it together piece by hidden piece, I want you to know this. Every time they overlooked me, they handed me a tool, a sharper edge, a stronger resolve. They thought they were keeping me small. They were building me an empire. It started, like most things that matter, with rage. Not the fire-breathing, table-flipping kind. No, I'm talking about that slow, tight-lipped kind. The kind that builds when you're praised for being so patient while someone else takes credit for your idea. The kind that settles into your bones when a room full of people talks over you and you start believing you're not worth hearing anyway. The kind that makes you want to disappear, but instead, you create. My moment came one October night, curled up on our sofa in Brooklyn, still in my work jeans, laptop balanced on my knees. Clay had fallen asleep next to me, TV remote slipping from his hand, some finance docuseries humming in the background. I had just finished redoing a client's landing page for the 3rd time, because their cousin had design notes. My inbox was a war zone. My calendar was double booked. I felt like a vending machine. People pushed a button. I produced work. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened a blank Figma board and titled it Project Ghost. Because that's what I felt like. A ghost in my own life. But if no one was watching me, maybe that meant I was free to build without permission. At first, it was just a thought experiment. I'd always had a knack for pattern recognition, especially in how people used tech when no one was watching. I noticed how Gen Z freelancers juggled multiple income streams, web design, affiliate links, teaching boot camps, and how clunky the ecosystem was. So I started mapping it out, a seamless platform where digital creatives could centralize all their work, portfolio, payments, collaborations, contracts. No code, no friction. I didn't tell Clay, or my clients, or my team. I built it at night on weekends, sometimes between bites of reheated pasta. I coded the prototype myself, pulled in 2 freelancers I trusted from a Women in Tech Slack group, and bootstrapped the rest. It was messy, and slow, and thrilling. The name came later, Vesta, after the Roman goddess of hearth and home, because I wanted creators, especially women, especially outsiders, to feel like they finally had a digital home that didn't ask them to shrink. I launched the beta quietly on a Tuesday. 73 people signed up in the first 24 hours. That number ballooned to 5,000 by month 2. By the end of the quarter, we were hosting entire collectives, Black illustrators in Atlanta, queer coders in Berlin, fashion video editors in Mumbai. They weren't just using Vesta, they were growing inside it. One day, I got an email from a venture fund partner who'd stumbled on Vesta through his wife's newsletter. He asked for a meeting. I said yes, then cried in the shower because I didn't have anything to wear that said founder and feral burnout survivor at the same time. The pitch deck? I made it in one night. It was half strategy, half spite. They offered me $2 million in seed capital. I declined, not because I didn't need the money, but because I didn't want another boardroom full of people who needed me to translate my worth into numbers they already understood. Instead, I bootstrapped longer, focused on user growth. Revenue followed. Investors circled back, but now I had leverage. I took on 2 silent partners, kept majority equity, and built Vesta into something the Graftons couldn't have dreamt up if they tried. All while sitting at their dinner tables, smiling politely, nodding along to yacht stories. They had no idea. That made it sweeter. Every Sunday dinner I spent listening to Maura drone on about her charity galas while I quietly reviewed beta test results under the table. Every eye roll I swallowed when Gordon asked, "So you still doing that pixel thing?" It was fuel. I didn't need them to believe in me. I needed them to stay out of my way. And they did, until they didn't. Until Maura decided she couldn't stand how I was always too busy to participate in her curated family narrative. So she did what Graftons do best. She cut me out, of photos, of parties, of the yacht. But here's what she didn't know. Vesta had just crossed a threshold. A major acquisition offer was on the table, one that would turn my little app into the digital backbone of a luxury creative network expanding across Europe. The deal would close in a week. And tucked inside that deal, somewhere between brand roll-ups and asset evaluations, was something that would bring this story full circle. Something with a name painted in gold on the side of a boat. But we're not there yet. First, there's a dinner I have to survive. One last seat at a long table I don't belong to. And this time, I wouldn't sit quietly. It was the Thursday before the dinner, what Maura liked to call the gathering, as if we were convening a council of nobles instead of just a painfully polite display of wealth and veiled hostility. I was in the middle of reviewing the final legal packet for the Vesta acquisition. The numbers were surreal. A mid-8-figure buyout, retention bonuses for my original team, and a clause that would give me full creative control over Vesta's brand legacy, even under the new umbrella. It was everything I had worked for, quietly, for years. 100,000 tiny clicks and design choices and emails and investor calls and borrowed clothes, all culminating in one dotted line. I hadn't told Clay. I hadn't told anyone. Somewhere between my 5th revision of the brand integration proposal and my 2nd espresso, I got the official reminder text from Maura. Dinner at 7 p.m. Saturday, formal attire, please don't bring your laptop to the table this year. I stared at the screen. I almost replied with, I'll bring a laptop if I want to buy the building again. But I didn't. I just locked the phone and got back to work. That night, over dinner, I finally mentioned it to Clay. Not the deal, just the dinner. He groaned. Do we really have to go? Your sister said it's important. She says that about every dinner that isn't about her. Which is none of them, I said, and we both smirked. But underneath the joke was a tangle of something heavier. I was gearing up to walk into that house and pretend, once again, that I wasn't building something seismic, that I was just Clay's wife, good with fonts. Except, this time, I wasn't pretending. This time, I was walking in as a woman about to become the majority shareholder of a holding company that owned, among other things, luxury hospitality groups, several European media startups, and one curious maritime division. I'd done my homework. That division held a handful of high-end charter vessels used for private events and rentals. One of them, based in the Mediterranean, had recently been transferred to the holding company's balance sheet due to an asset foreclosure from a family trust in tax delinquency. It was named Odyssey 2. I sat in my office for a long time that night, just staring at that clause in the asset report. The universe didn't just hand me poetic justice, it handed me a full-circle punchline wrapped in mahogany and champagne leather. I owned the yacht, or I would, in 72 hours. The same yacht Maura had uninvited me from, the one they were probably toasting on right now, spinning stories about how Marlowe's too busy with her little startup to make time for family. They were right. I was busy. I was busy becoming their landlord. But still, I didn't tell anyone. Not Clay, not my assistant, not even Jaya, my head of ops who once saw me cry behind a server rack during a product outage and never brought it up again. Because I needed to feel it for myself first. The shift, the power of it. The reversal that didn't come from vengeance but from clarity. I'd spent years keeping my head down, building quietly in the shadows of their condescension. And now, on the brink of something massive, I had one last step to take. One last performance to endure. Saturday came fast. I wore a black jumpsuit with a plunging neckline and wide legs. Something that would have made Maura twitch, but still tasteful enough to make Gordon's wife say, "You always dress interestingly." I pulled my hair back, skipped the jewelry, and wore my boots. Not heels. Boots, because I was going in armored. We pulled up to the Grafton brownstone right on time. Clay reached for my hand. I let him hold it, even though my fingers were ice cold. I wasn't nervous. I was aware of everything. The cracks in the marble steps, the way the help opened the door without a smile, the smell of rosemary and something roasted that had probably been plated since noon. Inside, the family buzzed like expensive bees. Champagne flutes clinked, someone's child screamed joyfully, and Cambria was already posing near the fireplace for just a few candids, while Maura directed lighting angles like a Vogue shoot. Then she saw me, and her face did that flicker, the one where her smile stutters just long enough to suggest panic before recovering into practiced warmth. "Marlo," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "I heard we're celebrating something big tonight." Her eyes flickered again. "Oh, did you?" She didn't elaborate. She thought she was holding the cards. She had no idea I had the entire deck. The dining room had always felt like a stage. A long lacquered table under a chandelier that looked like it was forged from the teeth of angels. 12 velvet chairs, gold-rimmed china, conversation flowing in rehearsed beats. It was Maura's masterpiece, her carefully curated theater of status. And tonight it was packed. Jordan and Cambria were seated near the head, Cambria already halfway through her first glass of Pinot. Gordon, Clay's father, was holding court about the collapse of work ethic in today's digital economy. Clay's mother, Celeste, nodded rhythmically like it was a sermon. Maura glided between chairs like she was walking a runway, topping off glasses and dropping compliments as if she invented charm. And I took my usual seat, 3 down from the end, diagonal from Maura, close enough to observe, far enough to forget. I unfolded my napkin like I was peeling back armor. Dinner began with soup, always soup, something infused with truffle or saffron or other expensive ingredients I knew I wasn't supposed to comment on because real sophistication never pointed at itself. Jordan opened the first volley. "So, Marlo, still doing the computer art thing?" I smiled politely. Still running my company, yes, Cambria laughed. She's being humble. I heard you're doing some influencer app? That's fun. Like for Etsy girls? Sure, I said, for Etsy girls, and digital illustrators, and freelance legal consultants, and non-profit accessibility designers. A pause. Sounds adorable, Maura said, swirling her wine. It's amazing how people can monetize anything these days. And there it was, the first slap wrapped in a satin glove. Clay said nothing, just shifted in his chair and glanced at me, the way he did when he didn't want to pick a side. I didn't flinch. Maura turned the conversation toward Jordan's latest rental property, a quiet little compound in Vale. Someone else asked Celeste about her garden party plans. I sat there, smiling, chewing, breathing. Then came the question, the one they always saved for the moment just before dessert, when the drinks had loosened the tension but not enough to excuse direct confrontation. So, Maura said, her voice sweet as syrup, are you and Clay still planning to skip the family yacht trip next quarter? It's such a shame, the Odyssey 2 feels empty without everyone on board. I let the pause stretch, let it breathe. Clay shifted again, his jaw tightening. He hadn't seen the post, or if he hadn't said a word. That was his thing, neutrality as performance. I leaned in, voice quiet but crisp. Oh, I'm sure you'll all enjoy it plenty. Of course we will, Maura replied, flashing teeth. I just hope you're not overextending yourself with that little business of yours. It's easy to get overwhelmed when you try to do everything. Cambria chimed in. Yeah, balance is everything. That's why I stepped back from my blog. Mental health is so in right now. Laughter, polite, controlled. I swallowed it whole. Dessert came, a plum tart with edible gold leaf. It glistened, delicate and shallow like everything else in that room. Gordon raised his glass. I'd like to propose a toast. Of course he would. To Maura, he said, turning slightly to face her. For once again bringing this family together, your ability to keep us grounded, connected, and aligned is a gift. Maura dipped her head. Thank you, Gordon. Family is everything. And then it happened. She turned to me and smiled. And sometimes, she said, raising her glass, when parts of the family take different paths, it's important to make space for all of us to grow. Clay looked up. What does that mean? Maura exhaled like she was bored of holding it in. It means, she said slowly, that we've had discussions and we feel it might be best if Marlowe stepped back from certain events, some gatherings, traditions, the yacht, things that, frankly, haven't aligned in a while. Celeste nodded solemnly like someone had died. Jordan scratched his chin. Yeah, it just always feels tense, you know? Cambria fake frowned. We just want what's best for you, for everyone. Clay looked stunned, but I wasn't. I was waiting for it. They had rehearsed this, polished it, probably even vetted the language with a lawyer, and here it was, the performance of the century, an unofficial, very formal exile disguised as a wellness intervention. I stared at Maura, who was basking in her power like a queen. They thought this was the climax. They had no idea. I understand, I said quietly, placing my fork down. Thanks for letting me know. Maura blinked. No protest, no tears, no scene. That was the real threat, wasn't it? A woman who didn't beg to stay, because I wasn't staying. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed either. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single notification. The deal had closed. It was Clay who noticed first. The buzz of my phone wasn't loud, but something in my stillness made him glance over. I didn't check it right away. I let it sit there in my lap like a lit fuse, warm against my thigh, vibrating with quiet finality. Maura, meanwhile, was still sipping her wine, clearly pleased with herself. Jordan had gone back to scrolling through photos of his Vale rental to show Gordon, and Cambria was complimenting Celeste on her new eye lift. So subtle, like he just woke up rested from the Hamptons. No one knew they'd just excommunicated the woman who now owned the boat they were planning to drink rosé on all summer. Except me. I finally picked up the phone, thumbed it open. Subject: confirmation of asset acquisition, Vesta plus Cerulean Holdings. It was official. The papers had been signed, the money had moved. Vesta had been absorbed into one of the most forward-facing European luxury holding companies in the world. And as the founder, I was awarded not only an executive position, but substantial ownership. A special clause in the merger transferred part of the Cerulean portfolio to me directly. That portfolio included a dozen high-profile assets, one of which had just been listed under my name. Odyssey 2. I stared at the words on the screen like they belonged to someone else. Not Marlo, the invisible one. Not Marlo, the girl folding napkins into peacocks. Marlo, the majority shareholder of the company that had just acquired the very thing I had been excluded from. It felt unreal. It also felt quiet. Not triumphant, not loud. Not the kind of thing you slap down like a poker chip. This wasn't about revenge, it was about returning to myself. But still, I wanted her to know. I slipped the phone into my clutch, calmly picked up my wine glass, and stood. "More," I said, my voice steady. Everyone turned. She smiled, tight-lipped. "Yes? I just wanted to say thank you." That caught her off guard. "Oh? Yes," I said, for giving me so much space to grow separately. Clay straightened in his chair. "Marlo?" "I mean it," I continued, walking my fingers along the rim of my glass. If I hadn't had the distance, I might have been too distracted to focus on what really mattered, like closing the acquisition today. Mora blinked. "Acquisition?" Jordan snorted. "You bought another software plug-in?" I smiled. "No, my company was just acquired. It's been in the works for a while, and as part of that deal, I now hold direct ownership of certain assets." A pause. "Which ones?" Mora asked slowly. I let the silence hang. Then, "Well, one of them's a yacht." Mora went still. You could feel the ripple move down the table. Cambria tilted her head like a confused puppy. Gordon squinted. Celeste clutched her pearls. Actually clutched them. "The Odyssey too?" Mora asked. I gave her a small nod. "Funny, right? I guess I'll be deciding who gets invited on board this year." Clay choked on his drink. Jordan laughed, nervously, like maybe it was a joke. But it wasn't. I watched Mora's composure fray in real time. Her knuckles tightened around her glass, that perfect socialite mask twitching like a glitching app. For once, she had no lines prepared. No rescue from Celeste, no smarmy punchline from Jordan. Just the truth. Raw. Undeniable. Embarrassing. She'd tried to push me out, and I'd quietly bought the floor she stood on. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call her names or throw my drink. That would have been giving her too much credit. Instead, I set my napkin down, leaned toward her slightly, and said with genuine calm, "You should really be careful who you underestimate." I turned to Clay. "Are you coming?" He hesitated. It was a long silence. He looked at me, then at them, then back at me. Finally, he rose, smoothed his tie, and followed me out of the room. As we left, I could still feel Mora's eyes burning into my back. But I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had said everything without raising my voice. And the power of silence, that was something they had taught me. I just finally used it better than they did. The street outside the Grafton brownstone felt sharper somehow, like even the air had been ironed flat. Clay walked beside me in silence for a full block, the only sound the soft rhythm of our boots on the pavement and the occasional taxi horn in the distance. Finally he asked, "So it's real? You own the Odyssey too?" I stopped walking. Turned to him. "Yes." His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, some excuse, some protest, something, but nothing came out. "You knew they were planning that, didn't you?" I asked. He looked down. "I suspected," Mora hinted, "said things would be easier if you just stepped back." I folded my arms. "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't want to make things worse." I laughed, not loud, not cruel, just flat. "Clay, I built an entire company in secret. I've had meetings in bathroom stalls and pitch calls during your mother's brunches. Nothing they could do would have made it worse." He sighed. "I thought if I stayed out of it, they'd let it go. And instead," I said, "they tried to erase me." A long pause. Then, softly, he said, "I didn't know they'd take it that far." I nodded, not out of forgiveness but out of finality. There was nothing left to argue. We walked the next 2 blocks in silence. When we got home, he poured himself a drink. I sat on the couch and opened my laptop. I wasn't angry, not in the way I used to be. I wasn't hurt either, not really. What I felt now was something quieter, steadier. I felt done, not with Clay, not yet, but with chasing a seat at their table. I didn't need it anymore. And just as that thought settled in my chest, my email dinged again. Subject, Internal Transfer Confirmation, Cerulean Asset Restructure, Vesta Division. Attached were the official documents. I was now the head of a newly formed subdivision, one that included not only the yacht but an entire lifestyle brand portfolio. Mora hadn't just lost the boat. She'd lost the entire event company that hosted their annual summer retreats. The contracts, the catering rights, the photographers, the stylists, they were all under the new umbrella, which meant if she wanted her annual family-only yacht trip to look like it always did, she'd have to book it through me. I closed the email, sat back. That should have thrilled me. But it didn't. Because suddenly, I wasn't interested in holding power over her. I wanted to do something better with it. I wanted to build something for people who knew what it was to be shut out, to be told they were too much or not enough or cute for trying. I opened a new tab and messaged Jaya. Want to build something wild? A creator sanctuary, global, women-led, full autonomy, zero gatekeeping. The yacht is just the beginning. She responded immediately. Say no more. I'm in. And just like that, the next phase of Vesta was born. I wasn't going to turn the yacht into a symbol of revenge. I was going to turn it into a launch pad. Imagine, retreats for first-gen founders, women who code in languages no one in their families understand, artists who barter for ad space, designers who built their empires out of Canva templates and self-doubt. They wouldn't just rent the boat, they'd own the moment. I poured myself a glass of wine and stared out the window. Somewhere across the city, Maura was probably still at that table, wondering how she lost control. But I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about who I'd bring on board next. Not because they had the last name, but because they'd earned it. The next morning, I woke up to 7 missed calls and 3 texts from Maura. All short, can we talk? Just want to clear the air. You've made your point. I didn't respond. Instead, I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and added one more line to the onboarding page of our soon-to-launch Vesta Collective Retreats site, exclusively for self-made creators. No nepotism, no gatekeeping, no apologies. I stared at those words for a long time. For years, I'd been the one who apologized, for not dressing the part, for working during brunch, for making things from scratch instead of buying smart. The Graftons had mistaken grace for permission. They assumed quiet meant weak. Now they were scrambling to decode a silence that had turned into power. Clay shuffled into the kitchen, hair a mess, t-shirt creased. He looked like he hadn't slept. Maura called, he said, as if I hadn't seen it. I know. She wants to talk in person. I sipped my coffee. Let her want. He rubbed the back of his neck. She's saying it was taken out of context. I smiled, just slightly. What part? The part where they formally exiled me from their version of family? Or the part where they toasted to it? He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned against the counter, looked at me like he didn't quite recognize me, which was fair, because I was no longer the woman he married. Not the way he remembered me, at least. I had shifted, grown out of the frame they'd tried to keep me in, and I wasn't going back. I think, I said gently, you need to figure out who you are when you're not translating Maura's expectations into everyone else's language. He looked wounded, but he didn't argue, and I didn't twist the knife. I wasn't angry with him anymore. I just couldn't carry both of us. Later that day, I got an email from a boutique marketing firm that had previously turned down my pitches, twice. They'd heard about the merger, and were deeply interested in collaborating with Vesta's new lifestyle division. I stared at the logo in their signature. It was the same firm that managed PR for the Grafton Family Foundation, Poetic. I politely declined. 2 days later, a thick cream envelope arrived at my office. Inside, an invitation to the annual Grafton Summer Soiree, this time listed as sponsored by Vesta Experiences. Maura had folded, publicly, professionally, perhaps without even knowing how deeply. They needed the infrastructure. They needed the look. And now I was the brand. Jaya cackled when she saw it. So wait, they're renting their own party back from you? Essentially. I was about to toss the invite in the trash when I paused. Something about it, the embossed lettering, the inherited pride layered into the font, made me think. What if I didn't toss it? What if I went, not as a guest, as the host? We redesigned the event, same yacht, same view, entirely new rules, no family nameplates, no obligatory speeches, no hierarchy of chairs or curated guest lists. Instead, digital creators, activists, writers, photographers, real people who knew what it meant to be told no and kept building anyway. And yes, Maura was there. Wearing her best linen set, glass of Veuve in hand, posture stiff from the whiplash of power shift. She didn't say a word to me that day, but she didn't have to. Her silence was no longer the sharpest tool in the room. Mine was sharper. Because mine came with receipts, contracts, equity, and a growing list of people who finally saw me not as the artsy one, but as the one who built the table they'd never been invited to until now. When the boat docked that evening, and the sun melted behind the Riviera cliffs, I stood at the bow. Alone. Not lonely. Just still. At peace. Letting go of the need to be accepted by people who were never capable of seeing me. I wasn't theirs anymore, and I had never belonged to them in the first place. The contrast was like stepping between two dimensions. The family dinner had been all marble and tension, wine-drenched backhanded compliments, and centuries of manufactured superiority. But this was different. I was sitting cross-legged on the rooftop of my best friend Talia's loft in Red Hook, a worn denim blanket beneath us, a string of solar fairy lights overhead. Talia handed me a paper plate stacked with grilled corn and tofu skewers, her dog Maple snoring at my feet. "Okay," she said, digging into her potato salad. "Tell me everything. Start with how you bought their freaking yacht." I laughed so hard I almost spilled my drink. I hadn't laughed like that in weeks. We stayed up there for hours, my phone turned off for once. I told her about the deal, the acquisition, the look on Maura's face. I told her how Clay had stood, but not really stood up. How the silence after the dinner felt like closing a final chapter of a book I didn't want to keep rereading. Talia listened with that soft, open attention only real friends offer, the kind that doesn't interrupt or perform or pretend to understand when it doesn't. She was the first person to ever tell me I was a strategist before I even believed it myself. "You don't just design interfaces," she once said. "You design exits, entrances, power shifts." And she was right. That night, we ended up talking about the first freelance jobs we ever took. How we used to meet at the 24-hour diner with our busted laptops and brainstorm client pitches over greasy eggs and burnt coffee, back when we thought 2 rounds of revisions meant success. And now, Talia was running her own nonprofit incubator. I was building a creator empire out of spite and silence. Maple was still afraid of pigeons. That rooftop felt like church. No choreography, no champagne flutes or centerpieces. Just us. Our stories. Our grit. When I got home that night, I curled up on the couch with a bowl of cereal and opened my email. Not the corporate inbox, but the Vesta user submissions folder. We'd recently launched a private nomination form where creators could recommend someone else, someone overlooked, for our upcoming retreat initiative. There were over 600 entries. I read every single one until 3 a.m., a single mom in Montreal who taught herself animation from YouTube. A textile artist in Lagos who coded her own e-commerce platform. A poet in Vermont who designed chapbooks for local high schoolers. None of them had Maura's polish. All of them had more power. These were my people, not by blood, but by blueprint. I replied to as many as I could that night, just a few lines each, nothing fancy. "I see you, I know what it's like to build in the shadows. You're not invisible here." Some wrote back in tears, some sent links to their work, some just said, "Thank you, I didn't think anyone noticed." And I thought, this is what family could look like. Not the one you're born into, the one you choose, the one you build. Later that week, I met with our development team to go over the new platform features. One of them, Jamie, a trans non-binary designer we'd hired 6 months ago, had added a toggle that would let users share their journeys publicly or anonymously. "I wanted them to decide how loud they wanted to be," Jamie said. I nearly cried. Because that was the thing, wasn't it? It wasn't about screaming to be seen. It was about giving people the choice. I wasn't building a platform anymore. I was building a sanctuary. And in the process, I realized something I hadn't even dared to believe before. I didn't need to heal through confrontation. I was healing through creation, through choosing softness without surrender, through building something bigger than the box they'd tried to fit me in. I didn't need Maura's validation. I had Talia's rooftop. I had 600 creators finding each other across oceans. I had Maple, terrified of birds but brave enough to nap at our feet anyway. And I had myself. Fully. Finally. The first message from Clay came 2 weeks later. It was short, polite, guarded. "Hope you're doing okay. I've been thinking." I didn't reply, not because I hated him, but because I no longer felt like he was mine to return to. I had spent so much of our marriage buffering him from the sharp corners of his own family, translating the slights, absorbing the silences, dressing myself in diplomacy. But I was done being the Grafton family's shock absorber. And even more than that, I was done shrinking myself to make anyone else comfortable. That weekend, I changed all my passwords. Not out of paranoia, just clarity. I updated my estate plan, removed Clay as my emergency contact and replaced him with Jaya. Then I built a new document folder titled Fortress. Inside it were guidelines, personal not legal, boundaries I had written by hand, not for them, for me. No more apologies for success that doesn't look familiar, no answering calls that come after erasure, no shrinking to fit into rooms I built. It felt dramatic, but it also felt correct, because for the first time, I wasn't just reacting, I was architecting my peace. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you choose when to open. And mine, they were reinforced with lessons I'd paid for in heartbreak. I installed a team therapist at Vesta, not for me, well, also for me, but primarily for the creators we supported. Some of them had been exploited, others had burned out, many had been told they were unworthy of attention unless they went viral. I knew that feeling. The brutal quiet of being dismissed, especially by people who should have seen you first. At our first team-wide mental health check-in, Jamie shared something that stuck with me. Sometimes you have to go no contact with your past self too. Not because she was wrong, but because she was surviving. I nearly dropped my mug. Because that was it, wasn't it? I didn't hate the version of me who laughed too hard at Maura's jokes, or who folded napkins for free, or who cried in a guest room while Clay looked the other way. I just outgrew her. And growing doesn't always look like glowing. Sometimes it looks like deleting a number. Sometimes it's leaving a party early. Sometimes it's saying, no, I'm not available, without an explanation. People talk about success like it's a mountaintop. But I was discovering it's more like a garden. You protect it from pests, you water it carefully, and some days you prune. I pruned hard. I let go of 2 legacy clients who constantly asked for discounts as a favor. I turned down a panel on women in tech because the event was being run by a group of all-male investors who couldn't name a single product I'd launched. I ghosted a few old acquaintances who only reached out when press releases dropped. And I felt lighter. Not lonely, just uncrowded. I took the Odyssey 2 out alone one Saturday morning. No photographers, no entourage. Just me, my thoughts, and a playlist Talia made called Get You a Yacht, Babe. I walked barefoot across the teak wood deck, sipped my iced coffee, and thought about how many times I had seen this boat from a distance, always as an outsider. And now, it was mine. Not as a trophy, as a tool. I had plans to convert part of the interior into a floating co-work space, to host workshops on pricing, creative burnout, building equity, to offer rooms for rest, not just strategy. Because no one teaches you that the final stage of reclaiming your worth isn't applause. It's safety, and I was building mine from the hull up. It started with a nameplate, simple matte black engraved in silver serif, Vesta Legacy, Founder's Deck. I had it mounted just inside the private lounge on the Odyssey 2, beside a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sea. It wasn't flashy, there were no logos, just a quiet nod to where we started. And beneath that, a single framed photo. Not of me, of my father. He wasn't famous. He didn't run a Fortune 500. He was a high school chemistry teacher who used to grade tests on the kitchen table while listening to old soul records. But he was the first person who taught me the value of building something from scratch. He'd say, people don't have to understand what you're doing, Marlo. Just make sure you do. The Graftons had always made me feel like my roots were something to be buried, but I wanted to honor them. Because while they were out there trading pedigrees and last names, I was building legacy. One that couldn't be revoked with a dinner toast. A few weeks after installing the nameplate, we launched our first Vesta Collective retreat on the yacht. 40 creators. 10 countries. No panels, no VIP tiers, no artificial scarcity. Just people who had clawed their way into visibility, finally exhaling in rooms where they didn't have to prove they belonged. We held a workshop on imposter syndrome. Another on pricing negotiation. We had midnight writing sprints and sunrise sound baths. There were no name tags, only shared playlists, real conversations, and the soft kind of laughter that echoes long after it ends. At one point, a young writer named Nuri stood up during an open mic session. She was barely 20, soft-spoken, eyes wide with that mix of hope and bruised ambition. "I didn't think people like me got invited to places like this," she said. "But I think maybe I do." And just like that, I knew why I'd done it all. It wasn't about Maura. It never was. She was just a loud chapter in a story that didn't end with her. The real story was Nuri, and Jamie, and Talia, and the woman in Nairobi who sent me a voice memo crying because someone finally paid her full rate for a logo. This was my family now. Not by blood, by purpose. I didn't need a seat at the Grafton table. I'd built a new one where everyone brought their own chair, their own story, their own flavor of brilliance. The press started catching on. "Formerly snubbed founder creates floating sanctuary for global creatives," one headline read. Another called me the quiet queenmaker of modern design. I didn't care for the titles. But I liked the idea that people were finally seeing what I'd always known deep down. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be undeniable. And when the yacht anchored off the Amalfi Coast for our second retreat, I stood alone on the upper deck again, watching the lights of the town flicker like fireflies in a darkened jar. My name was on the registry. My fingerprint opened the captain's quarters. But it wasn't about ownership. It was about offering. I had taken the very thing they used to exclude me and turned it into a door. And on that door I etched an invitation. Come as you are. Stay as you dream. That was my legacy, not in marble, but in motion. The night before our third retreat, I stayed on board alone. The Odyssey 2 was docked in a quiet inlet near Sardinia, the air warm with salt and stillness. No guests yet. Just me, a single lamp glowing in the lounge, and the steady thrum of the sea beneath the hull. I sat with a glass of chilled white wine, barefoot, wrapped in a linen throw, watching the stars blink open. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had anything to prove. Not to the Graftons, not to investors, not even to the ghost of the girl I used to be. The one who flinched at every dinner dig and folded herself into apology after apology. She was gone now, not erased, but absorbed. A part of me, sure, but no longer in control. I'd learned how to speak in rooms that didn't want to hear me. I'd learned how to build without applause. And I'd learned that sometimes the truest peace doesn't come from vindication, but from non-reaction. I hadn't spoken to Maura since the invite she sent last month. An odd, stiff attempt to collaborate on some kind of joint women in business gala, with her name listed first in every proposed branding doc. I declined, kindly. She replied with a single period. It didn't bother me, because by then I'd already moved so far beyond her orbit, I couldn't even see her drama from where I was standing. Instead, I was thinking about the new cohort coming aboard tomorrow. A textile technologist from Vietnam, a DJ turned data analyst from Sweden, a 52-year-old grandmother from Kansas who taught herself to code during chemo. These were my people now. Dreamers, builders, survivors, each one of them a galaxy, hidden too long behind other people's clouds. I closed my eyes, listening to the slow rhythm of waves. The yacht creaked gently, like an old friend shifting in its sleep. I smiled, not because I won, but because I had stopped needing to win their way. Peace doesn't come when you're applauded. It comes when you no longer hear the absence of claps as a verdict. It comes when you know who you are, deeply, fiercely, and no longer require mirrors to reflect it back. I wasn't the artsy one anymore. I wasn't just Clay's wife. I was Marlo Grafton, founder, builder, quiet storm. And this silence, this still, salt-laced, moonlit silence, it was mine, entirely. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by people who were supposed to see you first? I have. And if you're still reading this, maybe you have too. Maybe you've been overlooked at the dinner table, dismissed in a meeting, or politely excluded from opportunities that felt like they should have been yours. Maybe you've worked quietly, hoping your work would speak louder than the silence around you, only to wonder if anyone was listening at all. I want you to know something. You are not invisible. And more importantly, your story isn't over. Because the truth is, some of the most powerful transformations don't happen in spotlights. They happen in silence. In long nights, in small decisions, in choosing to keep going even when no one's clapping. If my journey resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the outsider, the underestimated, the one who doesn't quite fit, I hope you'll like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on your own terms. Because sometimes, the very thing they try to cut you out of becomes the stage you end up owning. And sometimes the family you thought you needed to impress isn't the one you were meant to grow with. So I'll leave you with this. Tell me in the comments, what did you build when no one believed in you? What dream did you keep alive in the dark? Because somewhere, someone else is quietly fighting to stay visible. Let's remind them, they're not alone. Let's build our own table. One seat, one story, one quiet triumph at a time.